There are a few different ways to install software on a Pocket PC or to transfer files between a Pocket PC and a laptop. Data can be transmitted wirelessly using Bluetooth or infrared, or with a USB wired connection. A wired connection will be faster and generally is a little more reliable. In order to communicate with the device from a Windows PC, you'll need to use ActiveSync for operating systems like Windows XP or 95. For newer operating systems like Windows 7, 8, or 10, you use Windows Mobile Device Center. These are built into the Windows operating system. An alternative to running mobile device synchronization software is to transfer programs and data manually using an SD card. This is my preferred way to both install software and to transfer files. It's a little more reliable, and it's the only way that you can really use a Pocket PC with a Mac operating system like I use. There are some limitations with older Pocket PC devices. They don't work with high capacity SD cards, so anything that's 4 gigabytes or larger can't be read on these devices. So you'll need to find an older card that's 2 gigabytes or smaller in size. In order for the PocketTopo software to work on a Pocket PC running Windows Mobile 5 operating system, you'll need to upgrade to Microsoft's .NET Compact Framework 2.0 as a minimum. I'll put a link in the description below for where you can download the .NET Compact Framework 2.0 as well as 3.5. 3.5 is the most updated version, and that's really what I would recommend installing. You can run this through an installer if you have ActiveSync or Windows Mobile Device Center with a Windows PC, and you can run the MSI files. Those are the installer files. They install the software through the synchronization software. An alternative is to download a .cab extension file, which you can put onto an SD card and then put directly into the Pocket PC. If you navigate to the SD card and you have this .NET Framework .cab file, you can then install this directly. So it'll install the .NET Framework. The installation should just take a minute or so, and it allows PocketTopo software then to run on the device. If you want to check to see what version of Compact Framework is installed, you can go to Start, go to File Explorer, navigate to Windows. So under my device, there's a Windows directory, and then scroll down and find the CGAC utility. And if you tap on that, it'll tell you here what .NET Compact Framework is installed. It says version 3.5. The main piece of software you want to use for communicating with the disto-x is PocketTopo. I'll put a link in the description for where to download this. It's freeware that's available through the Paperless Cave Survey website. And what you'll download is a zip file, and if you open that, folder, there'll be several subfolders that are different languages, and there'll be a PocketTopo.exe executable file that runs on the Pocket PC. So you just take that folder, copy it onto an SD card, put it in the device, and then you can navigate to that folder, and if you tap and hold, you'll get a pop-up window. It's sort of the equivalent of right-clicking, and you can copy that, then go to your device, and you can go to Program Files, tap and hold, and then click on Paste. That'll move that application to your program files. You can run it directly from that folder. You can also, if you tap and hold and copy the executable, you can then go and navigate back to your device and Windows and Start menu, and then you can put a copy in here or put a shortcut in here, and then that becomes available. If you go to the Start menu, you pull it down and have quick access to that application. In order to use PocketTopo with your disto-x, the disto-x needs to be paired to the device. You'll want to turn on the disto-x and ensure that Bluetooth is enabled. There should be a Bluetooth icon visible in the LCD. If it's not, then press the clear and function buttons for 2 seconds, and that will turn on and off the Bluetooth capability. So if you see that icon, then you know it's active. Another thing to be careful of is to make sure that the device is not in silent mode. And if it's in silent mode, in the top right-hand corner, you see 3 dashes. And silent mode basically means that Bluetooth is active, but no data will be transferred between the disto-x and the portable computer. I really have no idea why silent mode exists, but it has been the source of frustration for some people where it gets turned on by accident. If you see that you're in silent mode, you can press the function and units buttons simultaneously for about 2 seconds, and that'll toggle that back and forth. So you see the 3 dashes there, that means it's in silent mode. If you want to switch back out of silent mode, hold them again for 2 seconds. When you do that, you will lose any data that's stored. Once Bluetooth is enabled on the disto-x, the next step is to pair it with the Pocket PC. So on the Pocket PC, you want to go into the Bluetooth menu. You can either go to Start and Settings, and go over to Connections, and there's a Bluetooth icon there. Alternatively, in this case, there's a Bluetooth icon down in the bottom right corner. So if you tap on that, it goes into Bluetooth settings. So you want to turn on Bluetooth. There's a box for making the device discoverable. This can be checked or unchecked, it doesn't really matter. You want to go then to the next tab, which is Devices, and tap on New Partnership. This will then scan for Bluetooth devices in the proximity. Each disto-x has a unique serial number. I have mine printed on a small waterproof tag on the back of the device, so I can look and see easily. When you're in a group with multiple disto-x's, it's good to know what that serial number is so that you can keep track of whose device is whose. If you don't have it on a tag on the back, you can press the function button twice, and that'll tell you some information, including the hardware version, the firmware version, and the serial number of the device. So this, again, in this case, it's 3219. Press off to get back out of there. So on the Pocket PC, it's scanned and it's found disto-x 3219, and we want to establish a pairing with that. So click on that and click Next, and it'll ask for a pass key. You want 4 zeros is the pass key, 0000, and click on Next, and it'll establish a pairing. When you see the Bluetooth icon flashing, that tells you that you're getting communication with the device. Once it's been paired, this screen will come up. You don't need to click on serial port. You can just click Finish at this point. And now it will show up as an established pairing with this Bluetooth device. You can pair the Pocket PC with multiple disto-x's, but it'll only be able to communicate with one at a time. Now that the disto-x is paired to the Pocket PC, you'll need to establish a COM port so that communication can take place. So there's another tab down here at the bottom in the Bluetooth settings for COM ports. If you tap on that, what you want to do is establish a new outgoing port, and then it'll show you a list of devices. So we're going to do 3219. Again, if you have more than one disto-x paired, you can choose it in that. There'll be a list of devices here. We only have one paired at the moment, so 3219, click on Next, and it'll ask you for the port. The defaults are typically COM7 and COM8. These usually work the first time, but if it doesn't, you can choose the other COM port. I use COM7 as a default, and then what's really important is there'll be a box here for secure connection. You want to make sure that's unchecked. If that's checked, it won't be able to communicate properly. So we chose COM7 and we click Finish, and we get this error that COM port could not be created. Sometimes you get this, and generally if you get that, just click OK, go back in and change to the other option, COM8 in this case, and click Finish, and that will usually work. So now we have a COM port between the Pocket PC and the disto-x on COM8. We can click OK to get out of the Bluetooth menu. Now we're paired and we have communication established. At this point, we can open up the PocketTopo software. We can click on Start, and if you put it in the Start menu folder, you can find PocketTopo there. Otherwise, maybe you need to use File Explorer to navigate to where it is, or if you put it in Programs, you might find it in the Programs folder. So if we open PocketTopo, we get this data interface here, which is this data screen, and there's a menu button. So if you click on Menu, you can go up to Options, and then down to Port, and we established communication on COM8, and it's COM8 is checked. So you want to make sure that you match the port in the software with the port that was used to set up the Bluetooth connection. If we want to test that connection, we can go back to Menu, go up to Bluetooth, and click on Connect. And the flashing Bluetooth icon tells us that these are now connected. So if I take a reading, that data then should transfer to the PocketTopo software. If we want to disconnect, we can go back to Bluetooth and click on Disconnect. So for the disto-x units, there are a few different hardware versions. So there are some different laser modules and I think some different LCD units and the different disto units themselves. And then as far as the disto-x boards, there are a couple different Bluetooth chips available. So with all of those different hardware combinations, you may have to install certain firmware. The boards should ship with the latest firmware. The latest firmware that's available as of early 2018 is version 2.5, and I'm sure that those will change in the future. But if you want to check what firmware and what hardware versions you have, you can again press the function key twice and this will tell you. So firmware 2.5, that's the latest version, but I'll show you how you can update that, and I recommend going to the latest version of the firmware. Version 2.5 has the ability to analyze the unit and tell what hardware is installed and configure it properly for that hardware. It also has different software features enabled, so things like triple shot check, backlight mode, and things like that are available on later versions of the firmware. So there's really no reason not to upgrade, regardless of which disto-x unit you have, what hardware version, to always upgrade to the latest firmware. So to upgrade the firmware, you first have to have the disto-x paired to the Pocket PC through Bluetooth, and you have to have a COM port established and make sure that that's working through PocketTopo before you proceed to try to upgrade. Now what you'll need to do is download the latest firmware from the Paperless Cave Survey website, and I'll include a link to that in the description. Once you've downloaded that, you can unzip the file and you'll have an updater as well as some instructions. And again, I load those onto an SD card, and you can then put that in the Pocket PC, and if you navigate to here, I have disto update version 2.5, and I have that disto update v25 executable file in that folder directory. And before you run this, you need to put the disto-x itself into upgrade mode. In order to do that, you want to turn the unit off and then turn it back on by pressing and holding the plus and minus buttons while you press the red button in the middle. So if you do that, the screen will illuminate, but it will be blank. And it's in the mode now where it can receive a firmware update. Then you go back to your Pocket PC and you run this updater program. The screen will pop up and give you the option of dumping any information that's on the unit, and then the other option is to update, so just tap on update. And if you have a good Bluetooth connection, it'll say connected, and you'll see a progress bar, and it says update complete. Once the update is complete on the disto-x, you can turn it off, and if you turn it back on, you can go again to function, hit that twice, and double check that the latest firmware has been installed. So to calibrate the disto-x, I have a separate video that covers the details of how to do that. But just to review a little bit, if you go back into the PocketTopo software, calibration is available as a separate menu within this software. So if you go to Menu, Calibration, it'll open up the calibration screen. And this is data that was from a recent calibration I did on this 3219 unit. Once you're in the calibration menu, you can go back to Menu, and you can start and stop a calibration. So if I click on Start here, it'll put the disto unit into calibration mode. It'll say cal 000, and it's waiting for data. If you go back to Menu and click Stop, it should exit out of that calibration menu. Once you actually go through the process of collecting the 56 data points needed to run a calibration, which I've already done here, you can click on this Evaluate button. It'll go through an analysis and compute the calibration coefficients, It'll give you this delta value down here. In this case, it's 0.29. Some other options are under menu. There's an NL, which stands for nonlinear. So some versions of the hardware, there are some accelerometers that don't give a linear response with changes in angle. And in order to get low delta values, you have to have this NL feature checked. And it adds some additional calibration coefficients. It improves the curve fitting. So if I run evaluate again with NL turned on, generally you get a lower delta value. In this case, it's down to 0.16. I don't think there's any good guidance on whether or not you should use NL. I use it most of the time because it gives me lower delta values. And in some cases with some units, again, in order to get a delta value below the recommended value of 0.5, NL has to be turned on. Once you've run a calibration and you've got a good low delta value, again below 0.5, you can then use this update function here, and it'll send that calibration back to the unit. It'll say here in the menu, update in progress. It takes about 30 seconds or so for it to update. Once it's completed updating, you'll see OK down in the window there. So a couple notes on calibrations. Once you've conducted a calibration, you can save that data. So you can create a calibration file and save it. You can export it as a text file for archival purposes. You can open an old calibration file. But it's worth noting that old calibration files aren't of very much use. Some people have suggested or thought that if you conduct a calibration in one region of the country or in a particular cave, you could save that calibration file, and then when you go back to that cave, you could reload that into the disto-x. But the primary reason you need to conduct calibrations on a regular basis is that the magnetometers in the disto-x tend to drift over time, and old calibrations rarely give good results. So if it's been a couple of months since the last calibration, even if you're going back to the same cave you've been to before, generally calibrations need to be repeated over time, and the coefficients that are calculated tend to change with time. So saving old calibration files isn't of any great use, other than if you're a data nerd and you just want to see what the values are over time. Once you're ready to begin a survey, go ahead and go into the PocketTopo software. If you go to menu, there's several options you can set, including things like the units. You can use metric or imperial units. There are a couple other things in the options menu, including this smart function and the title bar. The title bar is just the top of the column here. I don't really think there's a reason to turn that off. The smart function, what it does is it looks for 3 identical or nearly identical survey measurements, and if it sees that, then it identifies that as a survey shot as opposed to a splay shot, and it'll automatically increment the survey station. So I generally leave that enabled. To start a new survey, you go to Menu, File, and New Cave. That'll basically clear any data that's in memory. So if you have a file you've been working on and you want to keep that data, make sure you save it first. If you click on New Cave, it'll open up a new file. The first thing I do once I open a new file is go back into Menu, File, and then save it so that I can name it, and you can choose a directory. One thing I've found with PocketTopo is that you can't bury files too deep in a directory. You can have it sort of in the main directory. So let's just call this test, for example. You can have it in the main memory or maybe one folder down. So you can choose a folder. I have one called surveys that's in main memory, or you can put it on your SD card, but it doesn't have the ability to look for surveys that are below that first menu level. If you move surveys into a folder and you bury it more than one level deep and you go to open a file, you won't be able to find it. So it has to be either in the main directory or, again, one level down. From here you can begin your survey, and if you haven't established a connection, you can go to Bluetooth and connect. Again, assuming you've already paired and set up a COM port with the device so it's flashing. You just want to be careful. If there's any data previously stored on the disto-x, it'll start to download that data. So if you don't need that data, you don't want that data as part of your new survey, then before you connect, you want to press the clear and units button, hold that for 2 seconds, and it'll clear the memory. It'll erase any data out of the memory. Now that communication is established, as your instrument reader begins to take measurements, the data should download straight to the PocketTopo software. It can read the device if it's within 10 to 20 feet. I know ideally they claim that Bluetooth has a range of about 30 feet, but I find once you get 10 or 15 feet away from the device, you lose that connection, and you can reestablish it later. You can always record data on the disto-x and then reestablish connection later and collect that data. Any data that's measured from the disto-x will be stored locally, and when you reconnect, it'll download. So I've collected a series of shots here that just for example purposes, and in each case I've done 3 nearly identical measurements, and again with the smart function turned on, it recognizes those as shots. And so it starts from station 1.0, and then the 2 station is 1.1, and then 1.1 to 1.2, and so the software will automatically increase the station by 1 number for each new shot. And this station naming convention is taken from Topo Robot. There's basically 2 numbers. So you see 1.0. The first number is the survey designation. The second number is the station designation. So this is sort of equivalent to, say, an A survey. So this would be A0, A1, A1 to A2, A2 to A3, and so on, like is more common in the US. And there's no other naming convention available in PocketTopo. So what I do is, if I'm doing an A survey, I may just write on the sketch page that survey number 1 is equivalent to the A survey. You can use any equivalency you want, but there's no way to use letters in PocketTopo. And so when you take the data later and want it, if you're going to use software like Compass or Walls, which are the programs that I typically use, you'll need to rename things, and I generally have to actually re-enter the data manually, which defeats some of the efficiency of having digital survey device. But there's no script that I'm aware of, or no conduit that allows you to export Topo Robot data into an application like Compass or Walls. So in PocketTopo there are a few menus, and to access those menus are down here at the bottom. The menu that we're in is the one on the left here, is basically the data table. And if you tap this again, there's a second data table which is for storing location information. So this is like east, north, and altitude. So this would be like GPS coordinates for an entrance or something like that. So some Pocket devices have GPS units built in, and you can record a location and then you can geolocate the rest of the cave survey. I generally don't ever use this. If I do geolocate stations or surveys, I generally do it in my desktop software. I don't bother doing it on the portable software, but this is a feature that's enabled in PocketTopo. If you tap that menu, that data menu again, it goes back to the main survey data table. Other tabs that are available are the data overview tab and then the sketch tab. In the data table, this plus and minus button don't do anything, but you have basically like a redo and undo button on the right hand side. So if you enter a data point that you don't want and make a mistake or something like that, you can always use the undo button to correct that. We'll go to the next tab, which is this sort of survey overview. Basically, it just shows you the overall line plot of the data you've collected, and you can zoom in and zoom out with the plus and minus buttons. So if you want to do that, and this displays the stations and so on. You can tap on one of these stations to select it. So I tapped on station 1.3. That gets highlighted down below, and then if you tap and hold, some options come up. These options at the bottom, you can hit this arrow to go back to the data table for that selected shot or station, and it'll highlight that so you can see where it is in the data table. So as you get to longer surveys, that may become useful for navigating. Other options, if you tap and hold, are to go to the outline or side view. Outline is another term for the plan view sketch, and side view is the profile view sketch. So if you want to go to where those are in the sketch page, you can select it there. The next tab is the sketch tab. That's this other icon here. And I've just sort of made up some mock sketch here as an example, but you'll see the line plot and the station names identified there. This is being displayed at a scale of 1 to 500, and there's a grid here, and you can select it. You can tap and hold and go to options to turn all these things on and off so that you can display the grid or not display the grid. You can use thick lines, which is what I prefer, or if you deselect that, it'll use thin lines, which are a little harder to read. So those are some of the options that are available under that menu. This grid, since we've chosen imperial units, the grid is in, each box is 5 feet by 5 feet by default. And if you're in metric units, then each grid box is 1 meter by 1 meter. So for sketching purposes, you may want to, you kind of want to know that for reference purposes. So right now I'm at a scale of 1 to 500, and again the plus and minus buttons allow you to zoom in and out. For sketching, I'll generally have it displayed at a scale of something like 1 to 300 or 1 to 200, which allows enough room to be able to see what I'm doing and sketch with enough detail and accuracy. And once you've picked a scale where you want to sketch, the interface is fairly straightforward. You have this sort of menu at the top here, which is pretty simple. There's an arrow, which is selected right now. There's a little box around it, meaning that that's selected. And with the arrow selected, you can sort of grab and move, and you can use your fingers well. This is not a multi-touch screen, so pinch and zoom does not work, but you can move it around with the arrow selected, and then you can zoom in and out with the plus and minus buttons. The colored dots at the top of the screen are the pen tools. So these are the only ones that are available. And I actually prefer this. It's a much simpler interface. You don't have different line brushes or symbol sets or things like that to choose from, but you can choose, you can just choose different line colors. And I generally use sort of standard conventions. So I'll use black for walls, and then I use brown for things like ledges, floor ledges or ceiling ledges, or rocks or sediment, sort of floor detail. I'll use blue for water features. I use orange for speleothems, secondary deposits, gypsum, things like that. And then I use red for text. So as a suggestion, as you're conducting the survey and the instrument person takes a front sight, and so in this case they did 3 front sights, and the Smart Check identifies that as a survey shot. After that shot has been collected, you can shoot any number of splay shots to define the room, or to shoot at specific targets like rocks or ledges that are within the walls. But traditional surveys use left, right, up, and down measurements. And what I like to do is when I get to the next station, the next 4 shots I like to take are a left, right, up, and down shot. And so I've done that here just as an example. So we've done 3 shots from station 7 to station 8, and then the next 4 shots are to the left, right, up, and down from station 8. So the to field is left empty. If that's empty, then this defines this as a splay shot. And the splays can be in any direction, so they may as well be left, right, up, and down. I've done the same thing then once I've done the next shot from 8 to 9, and then I have the next 4 measurements at station 9 are the left, right, up, and down. And if you go to the sketch page, the left and right on the plan view sketch, left and right are shown on there, and so that gives you some guidance. You can go to sketch, and then you know that the wall is there, and it helps you with a more accurate sketch. So another thing you can do in what they call the outline or plan view is you can do cross sections. So if you've done left, right, up, and down, those will help you with the cross section. So we'll go back to the arrow for selecting things, and we can select that station if we tap on it, and you can see down at the bottom it shows 1.9, which is that station. If you tap and hold on it, some options come up. Again, you can go back to the data page or the overview map, but there's also a cross-section that shows up here. So if you tap on cross-section, the next thing is to tap where you want to draw that cross-section. So let's say we want it over here, and I tap there. It'll place the cross-section there, and it's a little hard to see, but there's a dotted line that shows where that cross-section is, that it's associated with that station. And then you have these cross lines, which are the left, right, up, and down measurements that we took. And then you can go back here and select the drawing tool again, and you can draw your cross section, and you've got the left, right, up, and down as guidelines for the shape and where the walls as well as the ceiling and floor are located. Now you can also do profile view sketches, and to get to the profile view menu, what they call side view, you tap the sketch button again, second time, and the picture changes a little bit. But we'll go back to the select arrow, and then you can pan around. Again, you can zoom in and out. And this is our extended profile view. And if we've done left, right, up, and down like we did for those last two stations, those lines will show up here again, and it gives you some guidance. So if you want to draw the ceiling and floor, you have those there to guide you for where those are located. And you can put in some floor detail. Again, just to demonstrate how it works. A couple other things you can do with your survey. If you're on a survey trip and the passage you're surveying ends, and you're going to leave that area and go to another part of the cave and start surveying another lead, you'll want to go in and save under File and save any progress you've made. And then rather than go to New Cave, you can go to Menu, File, and just say New. And it does create a new file. It's basically a new sketch file. The data that you've collected so far remains there, but the sketch page will be cleared, and then you can start a new survey in a new area and start a new survey designation. Maybe we go to survey number 2, which might stand for the B survey, and we can start surveying that new passage, and that data will show up, and then we can start a new sketch associated with that, but that needs to be saved out as a separate file. And the other time I use the new function is if I have a passage where, say I have a hole in the floor of a room that I've surveyed, and the survey is going to continue down that hole, and it goes underneath existing sketch. And it may not be easy to draw that if there's a passage above or below other passage that I've already surveyed. So in a lot of cases, what I'll do is go to File, New, and start a new survey for passage that's going over or under existing passage. So I'll just show you a couple of examples of real sketches that I've done. You can go to File and Open and navigate, and this is Southern Splendor, which is an area in Carlsbad Caverns. And you'll see the data here, and with each of these I did a single front sight, and I manually entered the station names, and then did left, right, and up and down measurements at each station. So if I go from the data page over to the sketch page, it's on profile view, but again, you can zoom in. You can draw formations and floor detail and things like that. And I find that the stylus and the digitizer on these PocketTopo is actually pretty responsive. There's very little lag, and so as you write, handwriting and things like that, it's pretty accurate to the way it would look on a piece of paper. With some of the newer devices that use Wacom styluses, there's a little bit of a lag, and there's a tendency for the lines that you draw to want to simplify themselves. Sometimes they sort of turn into simpler curves than what you drew in reality due to that lag. But these older stylus is actually pretty responsive. And so just to show you, this is the extended profile view of that survey. And you can see where on the profile view, the up and down measurements show up as lines. And again, it gives you some guidance as to where the ceiling is and where the floor is. so you can more accurately sketch. And if I tap this again, it goes to the plan view, again what they call the outline view, and I've got a couple of cross sections in here. And if I zoom in, you can see that although I'm not using a symbol library, if I want to draw symbols like stalactites, stalagmites, or helictites that exist in this passage, I just draw them by hand. And I may use a particular color to differentiate them from other features in the cave passage, but I just draw those symbols out, and it's reasonably quick. It's at least as quick as it is on a piece of paper. You can see a cross section here, and again the left, right, and up and down measurements show up and give you some guidance as to where to draw the walls and the ceiling and the floor. So the last thing I'll show you is how to export data and sketches from PocketTopo. I use an SD card and I store everything on the SD card, and then I take that and put it into my desktop computer to manipulate later. But what you'll do is open the menu and go to Export, and if you are using Therion, Topo Robot, or Visual Topo, you can export the data in those in the format for those pieces of software, but there is no export utility for compass or walls. You can export the data as raw text file, and then you can go through it, say in an Excel spreadsheet or even Notepad or something like that, and get the data into walls or compass. But so that's how you would export the data. Generally with the raw data, I'll export it as a text file, and then for the sketches I'll go to export graphics, and then in here you can choose if you want the plan view or the side view, and then there's a suffix, so whatever you name the file, it'll save two versions of it. So if we call this Southern Splendor, there'll be one with a P on the end and one with an S on the end for plan and side view. You can choose the scale here, although you can manipulate that later in drafting software like Illustrator, and then you can choose other things that you want exported. If you want the grid, again it's in imperial units, that should be 5 feet by 5 feet. Then you tap on Save, and you would pick a name, a folder, and I put it here in Surveys, which is on my, you'll pick the SD card here so that you can, and then under type of file, there's only one option really, which is the DXF, which is DXF, my understanding is it's an AutoCAD format, and it's something that can be read by most drafting programs like Inkscape and Illustrator. Now if you go to File Explorer, you can check and see that if I go to my SD card and I go to Surveys, that it's saved these two files. So there's you won't be able to look at it here on the PocketTopo, but if you take that SD card and put it in a computer that has Illustrator installed or Inkscape installed, you'll be able to open and read those sketch files. So that's sort of a brief, or maybe not so brief, overview of the PocketTopo software. And if you're interested in it, I'd encourage you to go ahead and get it and just play around with it on the surface before you go on a survey trip, so that you get a little more familiar with the menus and the sketching functions. It's pretty intuitive, and it's a pretty short learning curve, so you can pick it up and become proficient pretty quickly. But I would encourage you to take a little time at home and practice with it before you go on a survey trip, and in particular get familiar with saving files and creating new files for when you change surveys, and the process for doing that, because there is a risk that if you overwrite a file with a new sketch with the same name as one with an old sketch, you might lose some data, which would be kind of catastrophic. So practice with that before you go on a cave trip, and let me know if you have any questions.